I think it's important to know, to understand when one or the other is used, because it requires different handling. If you need to feed a probiotic and you need to be alive, you need this product to be alive when you feed it. You need to be more careful, the storage in the fridge, prepare it shortly before feeding it. But if you're feeding, for example, a prebiotic, maybe you can mix it in a dry ration and can stay there for a week, and there's no problem.
Welcome to the Feed Science Podcast Show. I'm Adam Fairknowles from North Carolina State University's feed milling program on behalf of Wise Genetics. I'm again joined today for the second time by Federico Podversich, a PhD candidate at the University of Florida. He is again coming to us from Germany. We had a great conversation the last time we spoke about the use of different cropping types and ensiling technologies to prepare silage for cattle, something that he's been working on along with others in his lab as a technology for feeding cattle. So we're kind of stepping out of the feed mill and going into the field a little bit for that. Today, we're going to continue our conversation and talk a little bit about the different feed additives, of which there are many, that can be used in ruminant nutrition. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. So again, Fede, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's my pleasure.
You bet. So let's just start there with, when we talk about feed additives for cattle, what does the range of those look like? What are some of the different types of additives that we use, and what are they used for?
Okay, so that's a great question. It's a broad topic. Feed additives are typically ingredients that will go in very small amounts in the diet, less than 1% of the diet, in the grams per day or micrograms per day. They're normally used with a specific objective to, for example, to improve feed efficiency, to alter maybe the microbiome, to enhance immunity, reduce methane emissions, and those kind of things. They're widely used and they're different out there. And we've been working in our group. I work for the Dr. Nicolas Lorenzo. In our group, we do a lot of testing of different additives for different purposes. And there is a lot to discuss about it. There is a lot of commercial products out there. I think it's really important to know a bit of the differences and to mainly to have an idea of how to decide what to use and when to use. I think that's what I would like to communicate today.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's just start right there then. So as you mentioned, we've got different additives, some of which are classified as medications, some of which might be classified as probiotics. We have things that are out there that might be used to mitigate particular hazards that might be present in feed, like mycotoxins or something like that. And then you mentioned a big one that is really starting to pick up steam now, things like reducing methane and what that might look like from a sustainability standpoint. There's a very interesting thing that's happening for those that might not be aware in the United States right now, where there is legislation looking at additives and how they might be considered, where things maybe in the past, based on language, would have to be considered as drugs and medications. And today, or there's that legislation, and the people working on it are looking to ways to maybe take some of these things that are acting inside the gut that aren't necessarily changing the physiology of the animal, but are acting inside the gut to do something like reduce methane, maybe classified as something different. So with all of those in mind, let's talk about some of the most common things we use that might be including things like monensin for beef cattle and in some cases dairy cattle as well. We've got things like wormers that are fed, and then we have these other additives that are having to do with something like less on the animal and its production, but maybe on the environment. So you can choose. Like you said, there's a lot to talk about. I'll let you choose where you want to start.
So I will just start to mention, to do a comparison what we normally fed, or almost every feedlot will fed, and every growing cattle we receive when they receive concentrate, is the monensin that you mentioned. This type of additive is ionophore. What it does, it changes the cytoplasm of the bacteria that will have to expend energy to survive, and therefore they reduce the reproduction rate. So what you do is you control the growth of certain bacteria with this technology. Bacteria that it makes the animal less efficient, and you move towards another population that will be more efficient in the use of for the animal in the production of BFAs and energy. Typically, what you see when you use monensin, you see an increase in the synthesis of propionic acid in the rumen, and the propionic acid it's really beneficial, that this fermentation, because you don't lose carbons in form of CO2 or methane, and the animal obtains more energy. So the animal, at the end of the day, most of studies show that they grow the same, but they consume less feed. Okay, so they have an improvement in the feed efficiency, and therefore the cost, the feed cost of gain, that is called. This is probably the baseline, or the one that most commonly is used, unless you are in some countries that have already banned it because it says it's an antibiotic and should not be used. But it's not the case of the US. Hopefully, will never be. Hopefully, we have monensin for a long time. I want to touch also that you mentioned the probiotics, and I wanted to clarify something about it. There's this group of additives. There was a reclassification. Some in the past they were grouped into the direct fed microbials group. Okay, now there's also an interesting classification that is called probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. And this sounds messy, but it's at the end of the day, it's very easy. So when you're talking about products like this, probiotic is a live microorganism that you feed. You feed, and they will grow, multiply, they will colonize. They will also alter their own host microbiome, and they will confer health benefits. Okay, if you are using a microorganism that is inanimated or dead, or is not going to proliferate in the animal, it will, okay, or it's already dead when you feed it, that is called a postbiotic. Okay, because post life. Not necessarily a product that is working as a postbiotic, it will be beneficial alive, or the product alive not necessarily will have a positive effect. Some do, okay, but it's not necessary. And prebiotic is when we use a substrate. So it could be a fiber, a sugar, something that will also follow the same trend. It will impact the own host's microbiome. So if you feed a product that will, for example, enhance the growth of lactic utilization bacteria, okay, and this will help stabilize rumen pH, okay. But this is not a live microorganism. It's not a dead microorganism. It's just for example, beta-glucan or galactose manoglucan, some product like this. That is a prebiotic. What is the catch and what is the confusion? Some probiotics or some postbiotics, they also have a prebiotic function. It's not that they work exclusively because of the microorganism that you're feeding, but they are providing growth factors. Because a prebiotic is actually that, it's a growth factor. Providing growth factors for the own microbiome of the host. Okay, so here is where it becomes a bit messy. I think it's important to know, to understand when one or the other is used, because it requires different handling. If you need to feed a probiotic and you need to be alive, you need this product to be alive when you feed it. You need to be more careful, the storage in the fridge, prepare it shortly before feeding it. But if you're feeding, for example, a prebiotic, maybe you can mix it in a dry ration and can stay there for a week and there's no problem.
Sure. I was just going to jump in there and for our listeners that it's been a long time since they ruminant nutrition, or never took ruminant nutrition. That's one of the really interesting things about, and you've touched on it quite a bit here, is about feeding those ruminants, is we're so concerned with what's happening in the rumen, because in a lot of ways we're feeding the rumen, we're feeding the bacteria in the rumen, and that's the volatile fatty acids, the VFAs that you mentioned. That's what then is providing energy and providing the nutrition to some extent for the cattle, versus when we think about us or monogastrics eating, and it's in some way, I don't know, simpler is the right word, but we think about this is the carbohydrate, this is the energy, this is the fat, and in cattle we're managing this big fermentation vat all the time, and sometimes there are bacteria we want more of, and sometimes there's bacteria that we want less of, and then the weather's going to change, and so we do something different, and all these additives can have a huge role in that process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Ruminants are different for sure than as compared to monogastrics, and for that reason, one of the main difference in the moment when you decide what feed additive to use, there's some that have had a tremendous impact, or not, I don't know, tremendous, but they have had a notorious impact, and utilization has grown, for example, for pigs, such as, I don't know, enzymes or things like that. But if you think about the ruminant, they still don't have an impact, they still can help, okay? But you already have a lot of enzymes. You have a rumen with a big machinery of enzymes doing this function. So each for an additive to really have an impact in a ruminant, it has to be above what you already have. It's a more complex digestion machinery, the one you have in a ruminant, that compared to a monogastric. And also another thing I want to, so the species is important to understand the difference between the species. I also wanted to mention one thing that I think is really important. A lot of the differences between results and how an additive may work or not, it depends on other factors that we not always remember to look at. And I'll tell you a good example. Sometimes you can have a product that can help with the digestion, the digestibility, okay? But perhaps it's not providing a benefit, or you cannot measure the benefit when you have very low levels of intake. If you have a cow consuming low quality hay, okay, and this animal is consuming maybe 1.5% of the body weight, right? This hay and this fiber is going to stay in the rumen for a very long time. So the bacteria have plenty of time to degrade it, okay? Whereas if you go to an animal consuming 3.5% of the body weight, as such as it happens to us in some silage-based diet with beef cattle, or even worse, dairy cattle, they consume way above that. The time the feed stays in the rumen is much shorter. It passes through, and then the bacteria needs to be able to utilize this, and they fail. We know that they don't have enough time. So in those particular cases is when you see a benefit of some additives. because they help to catch the nutrients in this short time that they have to be utilized. This is an important thing. Another similar example would be if you are using a product for newly weaned calves, okay, and they advertise that okay, it can improve the immune response. All right, you may see a benefit if you're working with high risk cattle, with animals that have a challenge or a problem. Whereas if you're using it in a group of cattle that came from a ranch with all the vaccination, with no stress, well fed, and then probably will produce the same effect in the animal, but you just will not see a response because you didn't have the underlying problem. Right? It's like if you take a Tylenol, but your heart is hurting, you may see you will see a benefit. But if your head was not hurting,
sure,
you will not see the benefit, right?
Yeah. Nope.
So always consider the context is important, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to get into a couple more of the additives, but a question just hit me that I thought might be interesting for you to talk about. Can you speak a little bit for those that might be listening that are otherwise in an academic environment or rely on some of this research about what it's like to do research with animals like cattle versus a lot of the other food animal species that we do research with, poultry, swine, even to some aquaculture, what the difference is there when we're working with animals that have usually shorter, full production times, in many cases, unless we're talking about eggs on poultry or something like that, layer groups, but certainly the meat birds or the meat pigs. And what are some of the challenges of doing cattle-based research where you're working with ostensibly less animals and they're much bigger and the amount they eat and how long the studies have to be and that sort of thing?
Okay, so first I want to clarify something. For research, food animals, I've worked only with cows and some work with rabbits in Argentina. But it was more in Argentina. I work in a group of my university run by Dr. Ortega. They work with mainly with clinical trials. We worked there when I was in the group. We work with mouse, rats, rabbits, those kinds of studies. And here in Germany, I'm working with cells, intestinal cells. So I haven't done by myself hen or pig studies. Assume they must have their challenges. I can tell you what I think about the challenges on cows or cattle. I think it's important for cattle, we need to understand that there is a big individual variability, right? And you need to try to accommodate for that. You need to work to either or block or so group the animals for similar characteristics that will lead to explain variability, or try to work with experimental designs that will account for that individual variability. For example, doing baseline measurements when you can take them, and increase your repetitions. And there's also one really good thing that you mentioned about time. Some studies or some areas or some topics require more time. If you want to see, for example, if you want to see a change in the digestibility, yes, you may only need, with a new diet, you may only need 20 days. That's okay. Now, if you want to see a change in the mineral deposit in the liver, for example, you might need 2 months, 3 months, or longer. Depends also how strong is your treatment, right? How if you compare, for example, when we did one study, no supplementation of selenium versus supplementation of selenium, okay, in 45 days is enough. But when you see maybe a source versus a source with something else or some other change, a small change, for this, I think you may need a longer period to catch it. So it's science with a lot of common sense and understanding of what they're doing. Yeah, to run experiments with. But I like it a lot. I think it's really nice, and I think it's really good that the universities are working in parallel with the industry, because the industry has their objective is to know if the product works, but we from the university we can add the second part, that is try to answer a second question. So they want to know that the product works. We want to know when and how and why and in what other in which scenario. For me, it's really important to answer when it works and when it does not work. I want to know that too, and what this is dependent on, right? I think that's the most valuable information for us from the university standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. Coming down to any research, and I think it's a great way that you describe that as when we are working on collaborative projects with an industry that might have a new additive. In this case, talking about additives, and they, can we generate data that says that it works? And okay, yep. And in this perfect scenario, it worked great. But what happens when they're only on a low quality forage, or what happens when they don't have access to this mineral supplementation or those kind of things? Does the product still work, or is that data that needs to be there? I think that is some really interesting information and a great way to look at how we proceed and how we approach research. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and I think I feel privileged to come to the University of Florida and now here to Germany. I met a lot of people from the industry, and they really they like to know more about their products. I think there is a lot of responsible companies trying to find true information, and that's great. I think this will help in the advance of products and technology for the livestock industry.
Yep. And as you said, I mean, that's kind of our job at the university, right? Is to say, okay, sure, we can test that, but have you thought about this? Let's kind of finish our conversation out here, I think, on one of the real hot topics on the additive side, which are those additives that might be being fed to cattle from a sustainability standpoint. Now, this actually goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, and as you're talking about with something like Monensin, there's even an argument to be made there, a very good argument to be made there of, as you said, it's not necessarily that the animals grow bigger or faster or anything like that. It's that it improves that feed conversion. And yes, there's a profitability there that the industry likes, but also there's a really good sustainability argument to make there as well. If I can use this additive and therefore it requires less feed, and if it requires less feed, then it requires overall less cropland, less water, et cetera, per animal that I'm feeding. One of the other things that's still, though, thinking about what the animal is consuming and what's happening inside. Some of the new things have been related to actually things like methane production. And I'm sure as part of your research, and when you go through and do your literature reviews, you get to find all kinds of things, and some things that say like cattle are the biggest reason that there's global warming. And then there's this other stuff over here that says actually cattle's not that big of a percentage when you look at it the proper way. And just it's statistics and how we choose to look at the data in a lot of ways. But it's at least taken hold enough, this idea of reducing methane production, that the industry has actively gone out and universities have actively gone out to look for products and look for ways that we can feed these animals such that maybe there is a reduction in that. So what does that process kind of look like? What are those additives actually doing? And, do you see a good future for them?
Okay, so first to more or less to center the idea, I want to mention that yes, as to put together, I would say reducing the environmental impact and improving efficiency of the animals go hand by hand, right? So when you do simple management decisions such as implementing rotational grazing versus continuous grazing, this will impact the carbon footprint. The animals, the plants will be able to sink more carbon, and the same for feed. Providing a more adequate diet will help you. And we had a really nice talk last year in the ASAS symposium, the national meeting, and they discussed that the most beneficial or the greatest impacts come from a very well balanced diet. This is the number one thing, is to have a balanced diet. This will reduce your impact. From the feed additives, which is the topic we are discussing today, as you mentioned, it's very hot topic right now. There is a lot of companies working on it. A lot of being pushed by needs of some countries that are already requesting that the producers take some decisions to change this or reduce their methane emissions. And some countries are also subsidizing this. I think there is a good future. As you mentioned, monensin is a really great example. It reduces feed efficiency, it reduces methane emissions. Improve feed efficiency, reduce methane emission, and increases growth and feed utilization in the livestock. We have several products. Some are still not available. The most common or the most utilized right now, only with the idea of reducing methane, it will be 3-NOP is called. It's a synthetic product that interferes with the enzyme that synthesize methane. However, it has been used, but there is still some discussions about it, how to use, what are the secondary effects, if it alters or not the intake, if it alters production. It's still in being tested, I would say. It's still very recent. That's also the case, right? Even though there's a lot of people using it, I think we will know more in the future years. There's also a big interest in algae, for example, and it's working. So it can reduce methane. Probably the limitation or the constraint about algae is that it depends on, so the most common ones that are used, it depends on bromoform, and bromoform has been banned as something, so has been related to some health issues in the people. So the problem would be if that bromoform ends in the feed, in the food chain as milk or meat. So there is research being done there to see where we should use algae or not, and how, if there are other alternatives to the algae containing bromoform, and apparently there could be. Tannins is also a big supplement that they are trying to use to reduce methane. Is still a bit unclear. And also want to mention one that in my group there has been some work. It's the antibodies from avian origin. So these are, and probably you've heard about them. Some people have heard. It's when you create an antibody with a hen, and you extract from the egg. My group is still working actively on this, and I think it has a nice future. Hopefully, we'll see in a few years a product from that. My boss, Di Lorenzo, he started working with this type of technologies during his master's and PhD, and he continued. And I think that will be a nice alternative. I think it will be very of little harm, or we should not have any problem. Right.
So most of, when we think about, and this is not unique to cattle. I mean, it's true with any of the animals that we feed. Most of the things that we feed are either related to, improving nutrition, or they're related to something to do with a feed food safety kind of thing, whether it be, potential of toxins that are present in the cereal grains, like a mycotoxin, or medications that control diseases. You mentioned enzymes, which go back on the nutritional to make the animal more efficient because they can now digest particular products, types of starch, or types of bound minerals, whatever the case may be. Phytases for phytate phosphorus, all that kind of stuff. With these products that are being put out there, obviously everything costs money. It's going to cost me money to buy this product and put it into the feed. Are there any other benefits to these products from any of those other things, a nutritional basis or a food safety basis or anything? Or are these products purely marketed on, spend this X dollars per ton of feed or pound of gain intake of animal, whatever it is, for the purpose of meeting a sustainability goal? Obviously, that's a huge thing for companies to be able to say, hey, look, we are actively going after some sustainability goals. But a lot of times when we talk about additives that go into animal food, it ends up coming down to, okay, that's great if we can do something like that. Also, is there a nutritional or other benefit to the animal? Do these products have that, or are they really marketed purely on having companies buy into it in order to meet sustainability efforts?
Well, the going back to the first example, monensin, I think it's marketed more on the production benefit than the sustainability, right? Or it was used, I don't know, several years ago, start being used as a improving in the efficiency and not in sustainability. Then we realized it was sustainable as well. Tannins, they seem, especially at lower dose, and there is we are working in collaboration with Dr. Alejandro Castillo, and he from UC Davis, and he has done really nice work, and he explains very well that apparently at some lower doses, it can have a really positive impact on the health of livestock. The more mechanistic side is still under discussion and research, but it seems to have a benefit besides the environmental. For DMS, for 3-NOP, sorry, I don't know if there is also a production benefit. I doubt at this moment, and maybe there is, but because it was specifically designed to alter the enzyme that creates the production, so stimulates the production of methane in the bacteria. So then I doubt it will be such a case. For algae, for example, I think it can also be beneficial from, it depends on the scale, but the discussion is if it can be beneficial as a feed source, because in some places it's also in high amounts as a protein source or a fat source for the diets, because it's growing, especially in the sea. You can obtain large amounts of seaweed. I want to mention another that we've also been working. Dr. Juan Vargas is recently graduated from our group, and he did really nice work with nitrates. And prior to that, Dr. Darren Henry, they work with nitrates. And as you know, or maybe some people have heard, for ruminants, you can utilize non-protein nitrogen sources as a feed additive. And these sources, so not only as a feed additive, as a diet component, I would say, because you can use it at 0.5, 1% of the diet, 1.2 something. The bacteria in the rumen will uptake that nitrogen and will create new amino acids. Okay. The difference between using normal urea and nitrates is that when you use nitrates, the bacteria will also sequestrate hydrogen, and this hydrogen, it will not go to the formation of methane. Okay. There is also some discussion on how the nitrates can also be toxic for methane producing bacteria. I will not go into the mechanistic detail, but and it can be under discussion. But feeding nitrates, there is a linear reduction with increase it. Now, can we feed nitrates to a level that is feasible in a production system to really see a reduction in methane? That's also been studied. But yeah, this will have a double benefit. So you will be providing a protein source, and you will be impacting methane emission.
Excellent. Right. Excellent. So I'm sure that'll be a continued kind of push-pull in the industry as we look towards these products that can absolutely have a positive impact on the sustainability of animal agriculture, and in this case specifically beef, and other ruminant-based and cattle-based productions. But it's going to have that push-pull with the folks that are in charge of nutrition and feed costs, and the folks that are in charge of making decisions on sustainability and figuring out where those balances lie. So I think that'll continue to be an interesting thing to watch occur.
And let me add something, like a thought that I have. I think it's really important that we look in the future with the solutions for feeding livestock and livestock production in general. They should meet the goals of sustainability and help the environment, and at the same time be at least pay themselves or be neutral in the cost. And if they can provide an economic benefit, it's even better. Because at the end of the day, all these alterations may lead to a cost, and this cost needs to be paid by someone, right?
Yep.
So
it's gotta be.
I think, for example, one is not about the feeding, but the end product. There's some feedlots or some companies that are starting to producing their own biogas for their feed mills, for the production of steam flakes. I think those are the kind of solutions we need to look for the future.
Right? Absolutely, taking things, the lagoons and things that are there as part of the wastewater treatment and whatnot, and being able to cap them, collect the biogas, all that sort of stuff. No, I think that's a great point. I think you're absolutely right. That's the evolution of animal ag that we're going to see over the near and probably extended future, is balancing out the sustainability of feeding the animals on the input side, the cost, as you mentioned, that has to be borne by somebody. And, the companies are still going to want to make a profit. They're in business to make a profit, but the consumers can only afford to pay so much for food, and will only pay so much for food. We want things to be very sustainable. That's in everybody's best interest. Obviously, we all would, like to have a planet to live on and that's thriving. But at the same time, we also have to meet that cost. And then, of course, there's the animal itself, and the animal also has to be healthy and well cared for, and everything else is a part of that as well. So that's what keeps all of us that are researching in some portion of it busy and employed, right? Is there's a lot of questions, and they all have to be balanced together.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. It's been a great discussion, this and our previous discussion. I've really appreciated it. Again, my guest has been Federico Podversich, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Florida, obviously working in the area of ruminant nutrition. I very much appreciated the conversation, Fede. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Adam. It was really nice to join today. My pleasure.
Absolutely. For Wise Genetics from North Carolina State University's Feed Milling Program, I'm Adam Farnols. Thanks for listening to the Feed Science Podcast Show.